is about gerunds versus infinitives. Now, first, I need to tell you before anything else, this is a difficult topic in English. It's difficult for everybody. When do I use the ing and when do I use the to form? Or even a third option, when do I just use only the verb base? So if you're having troubles as you go through these lessons or you find you're making lots of mistakes in the exercises, don't worry, totally normal. For the gerunds and infinitives, it really just takes lots of practice, memorization, practice, practice, practice. So don't worry, it'll take a while before you get the feel of when to use one or the other. So this first video does not include everything because there's a lot of exceptions and idiomatic expressions and it would just take forever to include everything. So I'm just covering the main points in this video. I really recommend that you download the guide that goes with this video to see lots more examples and more explanation about this topic. Okay, here we go. Gerunds versus infinitive. First, when do we use the gerund? Number 1, we always use gerunds after a preposition. If you don't remember what a preposition is, I recommend you download the Excel document with this video. On the last page, I have a list of common prepositions. And remember, to can sometimes be a preposition, so don't get that confused with the infinitives. All right, next, number 2, we use the gerund after expressions with have, spend, or waste. For example, have fun, spend time, waste money, have problems, etc. Number 3, we use the gerund after certain verbs. What are those verbs? There's a huge list that you'll need to practice. If you go to the Excel file, again, attached to this video, you will see a list of many verbs that are followed by the gerund. They're not all there, but that is a good starting point. So we use the gerund following those verbs or some expressions too, which you'll also see on that list. And finally, number 4, we use the gerund at the beginning of a sentence as the subject. For example, smoking is bad for you. Okay, just a little note here. The infinitive can be used at the beginning of a sentence, but it's very formal and rarely used. So for all practical purposes, we say that gerunds are used at the beginning of a sentence. Okay, moving on to infinitives. Number 1, we use infinitives after certain verbs, nouns, adjectives, and expressions. Again, see the file connected to this video for a list. In addition to that list, I just want to focus here on a few other words that are always followed by infinitives. So we use an infinitive after many adjectives that describe feelings, willingness, character, or judgment. So here's a few examples. It's good to talk about it. I'm anxious to get my test results. He is likely to pass the exam. That was a stupid place to park. Okay, we also always use the infinitive after the adverbs to and enough. For example, I have too many books to carry. You're not old enough to have grandchildren. And lastly, we use the infinitive after question words, particularly when we use ask, decide, explain, forget, show, tell, or understand, plus a question word like where, how, who, what, when, or whether. For example, she asked me how to use the washing machine. Tell me when to press the button. We also use the infinitive to express purpose. For example, I went to the store to buy milk. This one is tricky and a lot of students make mistakes here, so I have a separate video that goes into more detail on this topic. Okay, now there's one more option that we can't forget about, and that's the verb base, or also sometimes called the bare infinitive. Firstly, you may know some of these rules already. We always use the verb base after modal verbs and auxiliaries. We also use the verb base after the expression had better or would rather. Secondly, we also use the verb base when we're talking about things that we are allowing or forcing or convincing someone to do for us. Usually with the verbs let, make, have, get, and sometimes with help. Often with these, those verbs are followed by a pronoun and then the verb base. So I'll give you one example with each verb. We use let to mean allow someone to do something. For example, John let me drive his car. We can use make to mean to force someone to do something. For example, my teacher made me apologize. We can use have to mean to give responsibility to someone to do something for us. For example, I had the mechanic check the brakes. And get, kind of similar to have, can mean to convince someone to do something for us. So she got her son to take the medicine. Okay, number 3, we sometimes use the verb base after verbs of perception. Verbs of perception are, for example, see, watch, hear, notice, feel, sense, smell, observe. And in a minute, we'll look at some more examples of these because sometimes the verb base is used and other times we use the gerund. And finally, number 4, we use the verb base after expressions with why. For example, why wait until tomorrow? Okay, we're going to look at some example sentences now, and let's see if you can identify why I used the gerund or infinitive. How about playing tennis tomorrow? I used the gerund because it is after a preposition. I spent a lot of time cleaning the house today. I used the gerund because it is after an expression with spend. Running is a good way to exercise. I used the gerund because the verb is the subject of the sentence at the beginning. I look forward to seeing you. This one's tricky. I use the gerund because it is following a preposition. Remember, to can act as a preposition. It was kind of you to help him. Here we use the infinitive because it is after an adjective. She is old enough to make up her own mind. Here I use the infinitive because it is after enough. Do you understand what to do? Here we use the infinitive because it is after a question word. I watched her walk away. Here I use the verb base after a verb of perception. I want to take a look at 2 more examples of verbs of perception here real quick, because remember I told you verbs of perception can be followed by the verb base or sometimes the gerund. We use the verb base when the action is momentary, and we use the gerund when the action is extended. Or another way to kind of say the same thing is that we use the verb base when the action is completed, and we use the gerund if the action is in progress or continuous. Okay, finally, one more example of the verb base. Why go out when we have tons of food here at home? Here we use the verb base after an expression with y. That's a lot of information to remember, right? Okay, so like I always say, please watch this video as many times as you need and make notes as you're watching. Check out the file attached to this video so you can see more examples. And when you're ready, you can go on to the next video where we will talk about those certain verbs and expressions that are always followed by gerunds and infinitives.